He was a broken Navy SEAL, betrayed by his own blood and left with nothing but a rotten storm station and a wounded K-9. But when the ocean rose, when the town lost its way, and when everyone needed a miracle, God used the one man they had forgotten, and the one dog who never stopped watching the door. If you believe God can turn pain into purpose, stay until the end, because this light in the storm will restore your faith. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories of faith, loyalty, justice, healing, and redemption. Outer Banks, North Carolina, wore the color of old steel that morning, with a low Atlantic sky pressing down on the barrier islands, cold wind dragging salt through the empty streets of Hatteras Village, and thin rain blowing sideways across the marina docks, where fishing boats knocked softly against their ropes like restless animals waiting for bad news. Cole Mercer stepped off the county shuttle near a closed bait shop, with his duffel hanging from his left shoulder, his right arm locked close to his body by a black medical brace that ran beneath his jacket and across his chest, and for a moment he stood still in the wet parking lot, as if the whole coast had shifted while he was gone. Cole was 39, tall, broad-shouldered, built with the compact strength of a man trained to carry pain without advertising it, with steel blue eyes that never rested long on one place, short ash-brown hair cut close at the sides, and a trimmed beard carrying a few early gray threads that made him look older than the years listed on his military file. He had once moved through dark water and hostile streets as a Navy SEAL with a clean mind and steady hands, but now even the screech of a rusted marina sign turning in the wind sent a warning through his nerves, making his fingers twitch toward a weapon that was no longer there. Valor stepped down after him without needing a command, a 7-year-old German Shepherd K-9 with a sable black and tan coat darkening along the spine, a deep chest, intelligent amber eyes, and one left ear bent slightly near the tip where scar tissue from an old blast injury had healed crooked. He did not move like a pet, did not bounce, sniff strangers, or chase the gulls screaming above the dock pilings. He moved like a working partner, silent and deliberate, placing himself just behind Cole's right knee, where the damaged shoulder and stiff back made sudden turns harder than they used to be. Valor had served beside Cole in places most people would never pronounce correctly, and though the dog carried his own scars under the thick fur, including a pale line across his muzzle and a stiffness in one rear hip on cold mornings, his mind remained sharp enough to read a room before a human hand touched a doorknob. When Cole stopped, Valor stopped. When Cole breathed too fast, Valor leaned just enough against his leg to remind him that the war was not here, not now, not unless the present gave proof. Ryan Mercer was waiting across the lot beside a black pickup that looked too clean for the weather, one hand raised in a greeting that would have seemed warm to anyone who had not grown up learning the difference between a wave and a performance. Ryan was 35, shorter than Cole but heavier through the middle, with sandy blonde hair combed back carefully, a smooth face that made him look harmless at first glance, and pale green eyes that often smiled a second later than his mouth. He wore a waxed canvas jacket, expensive boots without mud on them, and the kind of practiced concern people used when they wanted to appear generous while controlling the distance between themselves and whoever had come asking for help. As boys, Ryan had been charming where Cole was quiet, quick to make neighbors laugh, quicker to let Cole take blame when trouble found them. And after their father died and their mother followed him 2 winters later, Ryan had learned that sympathy could open doors faster than honesty. "Cole," Ryan called, walking forward through the rain with his arms half open, and when he hugged his brother, it was brief, careful, almost administrative, his hand patting the uninjured side of Cole's back, before pulling away as his eyes dropped to the brace. "You look rough," he said, soft enough to sound worried, while Valor stepped from behind Cole and fixed his gaze on him with such still attention that Ryan's expression slipped for half a second. "Dog still does that, huh?" Ryan asked, trying to laugh. But the laugh did not survive long in the wet air. Cole looked at the old family harbor beyond him, the shuttered seafood place where their mother used to buy shrimp on Fridays, the leaning white chapel near the dunes, the road that once led home, and he said only, "He watches what needs watching." The Mercer house stood 2 miles inland from the marina, not far from the Sound, raised on weathered pilings above a strip of sandy grass and twisted live oaks, shaped by years of storm wind. To Cole, it should have smelled like cedar, engine oil, his father's coffee, and the lemon soap his mother used on Sunday mornings. But when Ryan unlocked the door and led him inside, The place smelled staged and empty, like cleaner, new paint, and rooms prepared for strangers. Their father's old photographs were gone from the hallway. The framed Navy commendation that had once embarrassed Cole had been moved from the mantel, and the kitchen table where bills, maps, fishing hooks, and family arguments used to collect had been cleared, except for a neat stack of folders, a silver pen, and 2 mugs of coffee already waiting. Cole noticed all of it before he sat down, because his mind still worked that way. Entry points, exits, missing objects, new smells, changed sightlines, anything that did not belong. Ryan moved around the kitchen with the confidence of a man who already owned the air inside it, talking too quickly about probate delays, unpaid property taxes, storm insurance disputes, coastal easement adjustments, and their late father's records being a mess, while Cole lowered himself into the chair with more effort than he wanted anyone to see. The VA surgeon in Norfolk had given him medication for the nerve pain running from his shoulder into his spine, and the pills floated through him like fog, dulling the sharpest edges of pain while making words on paper swim if he stared too long. Ryan noticed, because Ryan noticed weakness the way gulls noticed scraps. "It is not dramatic," he said, spreading the papers in front of Cole with little yellow tabs already placed along the margins. "Just temporary management language, tax protection, asset consolidation, boring legal stuff. You have been gone for years, Cole. Somebody had to keep things from falling apart." Cole looked down at the documents, trying to force the lines into order, seeing phrases like property authority, transfer approval, limited management designation, coastal holding adjustment, and family asset protection, each one long enough to sound official and dull enough to bury danger beneath routine. His shoulder pulsed so hard that 2 fingers went numb under the table, and at the same time, a sudden slam came from outside as wind caught the screen door and threw it against the frame. The sound punched through him before thought arrived. For one breath, the kitchen became a compound courtyard, rain became dust, and the smell of coffee became hot metal and smoke. His left hand closed around the edge of the table. Valor rose instantly from the floor and pressed his head against Cole's knee, not whining, not making a scene, simply anchoring him with warm pressure and steady weight. Ryan watched that with the careful stillness of someone measuring the depth of a crack before stepping on it. "You okay?" he asked, and the question sounded gentle unless a person listened beneath it. Cole inhaled once, held it, let it out slowly, and forced his eyes back to the papers. "Fine," he said, though his voice had gone lower. Ryan slid the pen closer and tapped the first yellow tab. "Then sign these, and I can keep the bank off our backs. Dad left us a problem, not an inheritance." That line did what Ryan needed it to do, because their father, Thomas Mercer, had been the kind of hard, weathered man who loved with repairs instead of words. A retired Coast Guard mechanic who could fix a diesel engine in a gale, but could not organize a drawer of receipts to save his life. Cole signed once, then again, the pen scratching across paper while rain blurred the windows, and Valor's ears slowly lifted, as if the dog disliked the sound. 3 days later, under a colder sky and a sharper wind, Cole stood inside Ocracoke Community Bank, while a woman named Marlene Whitaker adjusted her glasses and tried not to look afraid of the silence in front of her desk. Marlene was in her early 60s, narrow-shouldered, neat, and soft-spoken, with silver hair pinned at the back of her head and the cautious kindness of someone who had spent decades watching families break apart over land, boats, storms, and signatures. She turned her monitor slightly toward Cole, her mouth tightening as the records loaded. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "The waterfront property was transferred to Atlantic Shoreline Group. The personal accounts were closed under authorization, and the vessel registration for your father's boat was released last week." Cole did not move. His pulse slowed the way it had always slowed when the situation turned truly bad. "What is still in my name?" he asked. Marlene clicked through another file, hesitated, then printed a page and laid it in front of him as carefully as if paper could bruise. "There is one parcel," she said, lowering her voice. "Cedar Hook Storm Station. Old emergency shelter structure. No utilities listed. Road access unreliable. Marsh boundary, on 3 sides." "I am sorry." Cole looked at the address, and for a moment the room seemed to go distant around him. The humming lights, the flag in the corner, the rain ticking against the glass. Cedar Hook sat at the far end of the island where stormwater pooled, sand covered the road, and locals stopped going unless they had a reason they did not want witnessed. He folded the paper once, perfectly, as if folding a field map, before moving out. Ryan was waiting outside in the pickup, windshield wipers dragging arcs through the gray rain, and when Cole climbed in, Valor settled in the back seat and stared through the gap between them with a silence so focused it made the cab feel smaller. Ryan kept his hands on the wheel. "It is still land," he said after a while, as if repeating a line he had rehearsed. "Most people would be grateful to have anything left." Cole turned his head slowly. The heater rattled. Rain streaked the windows. Somewhere beyond the bank, gulls cried over the flooded street. He did not yell, did not grab his brother, did not ask why, because the answer was sitting in the cab between them, dressed as paperwork and family concern. Ryan's jaw flexed under the silence. "You were never going to manage the house like this," he said finally, glancing at the brace, the shaking hand, the exhausted eyes. "You needed something simpler." Cole looked down at his right hand, watched the tremor pass through the fingers, then looked back at Ryan with no expression at all. Valor gave one low growl from the rear seat, deep enough to vibrate under the words that never came. Ryan flinched. Not much, but enough. Cole opened the door and stepped into the rain, taking his duffel with his left hand. "Give me the key," he said. Ryan blinked. "You are serious?" Cole waited, and that waiting seemed to drain color from Ryan's face. Finally, Ryan reached into the console and dropped a small, rusted key into Cole's palm, the metal cold and stained from years of neglect. Cole closed his fist around it. "I will take the station," he said, his voice flat as the winter sea. Then he turned away from the truck, Valor jumping down beside him into the wind, both of them moving toward the old road that led east, while behind them, Ryan sat motionless for several seconds, before lifting his phone to his ear and speaking in a voice too low for the rain, but not too low for guilt. "He took it," Ryan said. "He went exactly where we wanted him." The road to Cedar Hook narrowed, after the last cluster of rental cottages, leaving behind the wet glow of porch lights and the boarded seafood stands of Hatteras Village, until there was nothing ahead but a strip of sand-colored pavement, half buried beneath blown dune grass, the gray Atlantic rolling to the east like a restless wall, and the salt marsh opening to the west, in long brown sheets of reeds, black water, and mud channels that twisted away under the low winter sky. Cole Mercer drove with his left hand at the wheel, and his right shoulder locked painfully beneath the brace, wearing his full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, the long-sleeved blouse and matching trousers in AOR-2 green digital woodland camouflage, still fitting his tall, broad-shouldered frame like the last structure he knew how to trust, while brown combat boots pressed carefully against the pedals and Valor sat rigid in the passenger seat. The 7-year-old sable German Shepherd K9, watching the mirrors more than the ocean, as if betrayal could follow in a vehicle as easily as it could hide inside a signature. The wind hit the pickup broadside hard enough to make the door panels shudder, and every gust carried wet salt through the cracked weather stripping. But Cole kept moving because stopping would mean thinking too long about the house behind him, the bank papers folded inside his jacket, and the rusted key lying in the cup holder, like a small piece of proof that his brother had not simply taken everything, he had chosen what to leave. By the time the pavement ended, the sky had lowered into a thick iron color, and the truck rolled onto a sand track marked only by leaning posts and old emergency reflectors dulled white by years of storms. One side of the road dropped toward the marsh, where egrets stood hunched in the wind like old men refusing to leave a bad neighborhood, and the other side rose toward broken dunes patched with sea oats, their pale heads whipping in the cold. Valor's nose lifted toward the window, his amber eyes narrowing, his black-tipped ears shifting with each sound beyond the engine, and Cole saw the change in him immediately, because Valor did not waste attention on scenery. The dog's deep chest barely moved, but his body had gone still in the way it used to before entering a compound, when the air held something humans had not earned the right to notice yet. Cole slowed near a tilted sign half swallowed by sand, Cedar Hook Emergency Station barely readable beneath rust stains, and beyond it, at the far edge of a clearing where marsh grass met wind-bent pine scrub, the old storm station waited on crooked pilings above the wet ground. It looked worse than a ruin, because a ruin at least had the dignity of being finished, while this place seemed trapped in the act of failing. Its weather-gray walls bowed inward, its metal roof peeled back near one corner, its porch sagging toward the sand, and its windows broken into black rectangles that watched the approaching truck without welcome. The station had been built decades earlier as a coastal refuge for fishermen, evacuees, and rescue crews caught between storm surge and flooded roads. But whatever purpose it once carried had been left to rot under salt, mildew, and government forgetfulness. Cole stopped the truck beside a leaning post, killed the engine, and listened as sudden silence pressed in from every side, broken only by the sea wind moving under the building and making the loose boards groan like a ship settling in dark water. Valor stepped out before Cole gave a command, landing lightly despite the stiffness in his rear hip, lowering his head, sweeping the sand with his nose, and then freezing near the bottom of the porch steps with his tail straight behind him. Cole climbed down more slowly, pain blooming behind his collarbone as he lifted the duffel, but the moment his boots touched the sand, training returned through muscle before thought, turning grief into procedure and anger into observation. Wind direction east-northeast, structure elevated but unstable. Marsh access, west side, dunes east. No immediate vehicle tracks, fresh enough to shine wet. Porch compromised. Upper tower questionable. Possible human movement within the last day or two. He hated how cleanly his mind could still do that. Hated that a place meant to humiliate him became an area to clear. But hate did not stop his eyes from moving. Valor climbed the first step and paused when the board bent under his weight, not afraid, simply calculating, then continued up with the kind of discipline that made the rotting porch seem more dangerous by comparison. Cole followed, testing each plank before committing, and when he reached the door, he found it hanging loose from one hinge, tied shut not with a lock, but with a strip of fresh nylon cord. Fresh was the first word that mattered. Cole stared at the cord for several seconds, studying the clean edges where it had been cut by a sharp blade, then touched it with two gloved fingers and felt rainwater still beating along the weave. The station might have been abandoned by the county, forgotten by locals, and handed to him like trash by Ryan, but someone had cared enough to close it recently. Valor stood beside his knee, nose pointed at the gap under the door, and gave a low rumble that traveled through Cole's boots. Cole cut the cord with his field knife, pushed the door inward, and the sound it made across the warped threshold dragged a memory through him so fast that the gray daylight disappeared for half a breath, replaced by a metal gate grinding open in a village alley overseas, dust on his tongue, radio static in his ear, a shadow at a second-floor window. Valor barked once, sharp and present, and Cole blinked the storm station back into place. Inside, the air smelled of mold, brine, mouse droppings, old smoke, and something chemical faint enough that a civilian might have missed it beneath the rot. The main room sloped toward the marsh side where the pilings had settled unevenly, the floorboards swelling in waves from years of water intrusion, and a rusted potbelly stove sat near the center wall beneath a pipe patched with tin and wire. The roof had opened above the far corner, letting thin rain fall in steady drops onto a plastic bucket already half full, and Cole noted that too because a bucket placed under a leak was not weather, it was habit. A cracked table stood beside the western window, two broken chairs leaned against the wall, and a narrow doorway led into a storage room where darkness seemed thicker than the rest of the building. Valor ignored the stove, the broken chairs, the roof, and the damp cold. He went straight toward that storage room and stopped just outside it, body lowering, lips barely lifting from his teeth. Cole set down the duffel and brought up his flashlight, sweeping the beam slowly across the back room. Old storm shutters lay stacked against one wall, some rotten and some recently moved, because the dust marks beneath them showed cleaner rectangles on the floor. A coil of rope hung from a peg, stiff with salt, but not ancient. Near the rear corner, under a blue tarp darkened by mildew, Cole found 3 red fuel cans, one empty, 2 half full, their plastic newer than anything else in the station. Beside them, the damp sand tracked in through a gap in the floor showed boot prints, deep heel, squared tread, adult weight, and a long drag mark crossing toward the wall, as if something heavy had been pulled inside and later removed. Valor sniffed the mark, then sneezed once and backed up 2 steps, not from fear, but from dislike. Cole crouched, despite the pain in his back, and touched the sand, still packed, recent. Not hours, maybe days. The first evening became a sequence of small decisions that kept larger thoughts from reaching him. Cole cleared wet debris away from the stove, checked the pipe as best he could, broke apart a ruined chair for kindling, and fed the fire slowly until the smoke stopped coughing back into the room and began climbing through the patched flue. He dragged a warped shutter over the worst window opening, shoved folded canvas into a wall crack, and used parachute cord from his duffel to tie the front door in place from the inside. Every movement cost him something. His shoulder burned when he lifted, his lower back tightened when he bent, and twice his hand opened without permission, dropping tools to the floor with a hollow sound that made him stop breathing for one hard second. Valor brought the dropped items closer with his muzzle, not playfully, not sweetly, just efficiently, as if the dog had decided that survival here required division of labor. When darkness finally settled over the marsh, the station did not feel warm, but it felt less open, and sometimes that was the first kind of victory. Night changed the place. Wind came under the floorboards and through the broken windows, carrying the smell of tide mud and distant rain, and every loose strip of metal on the roof tapped, scraped, or shivered as if unseen hands were testing the structure from outside. Cole sat with his back to the wall, boots still on, shotgun within reach, the framed photograph of his parents propped on the table facing inward away from the broken glass. Thomas Mercer's face in the photo looked sunburned and stubborn, and his mother, Elaine, stood beside him with one hand on the rail of their old boat, smiling at something outside the frame. Cole tried not to look at it too long. A hard metallic bang snapped across the roof, and his body moved before the room could explain itself. Left shoulder forward, right side protected, breath gone tight, eyes searching for angles that did not exist. Valor rose from the doorway and pressed his side against Cole's leg until the storm station returned around him, one detail at a time. Wet wood, weak fire, salt air, no gunfire, no rotor wash, no men calling for extraction. Just after midnight, Valor's body went rigid, and this time he was not calming Cole. He faced the western window, where the shutter did not quite cover the broken frame, and a growl gathered so low in his chest it seemed to belong to the floorboards. Cole killed the lantern with 2 fingers and let the room fall dark, except for the stove's dull red eye. Outside, the marsh hissed beneath the wind. Then came one sound that did not belong, a soft compression of wet sand near the porch. Cole waited, counting heartbeats, letting his eyes adjust, then eased toward the window and angled the flashlight downward for less than a second. The beam caught fresh prints in the rain-dark sand below, one set of boots facing the station, close enough that whoever stood there could have looked through the broken window, and behind those prints, half hidden by wind-scattered grass, a second smaller track leading away toward the marsh before vanishing in wet reeds. Cole turned the light off before anyone outside could use it to find his face. He did not sleep after that. Morning came pale and cold, with rain thinning into mist and gulls crying somewhere beyond the dunes, and Cole stepped outside with Valor while the tidewater glittered in shallow pools around the station pilings. The adult prints had softened but remained readable. Heavy tread, cautious placement, approach from the marsh side, departure toward the old service path, while the smaller marks looked lighter, uneven, possibly a teenager, possibly someone running or limping. But Cole refused to build a story from partial tracks. Stories got men killed when evidence was not finished speaking. Back inside, while moving the cracked table away from the wall to block a gap near the door, he saw knife cuts beneath the underside of the tabletop. 3 letters carved deep enough to survive dirt and mildew. R. M. The strokes were sharp, recent, the pale inner wood still visible beneath the dark surface stain. Ryan Mercer had not guessed what this place was. Ryan had stood inside it, touched it, marked it, and then handed Cole the key with a straight face. By late morning, Valor began moving toward the rear of the station with a focus that had nothing to do with the boot prints. Behind the structure, half buried in yaupon and storm-bent cedar, a narrow set of stairs climbed toward the old observation tower. A skeletal frame of rusted metal and cracked wood rising above the station like the remains of a signal no one expected to work again. Cole tested the first steps, felt them shudder, and nearly turned back, but Valor had already gone up 6 feet and stopped, looking over his shoulder with that stubborn working dog certainty that had once pulled Cole through darker places than this. The climb hurt. Each step sent pain through his shoulder and down his spine, and the wind strengthened as they rose above the roofline. But from the top platform, the whole end of Cedar Hook opened beneath them, gray ocean to one side, marsh channels to the other, the station leaning below, and deep in the salt grass beyond the federal boundary posts, bright orange survey stakes, marking a line through land no honest developer should have touched. Cole narrowed his eyes against the wind, and Valor stood beside him, staring into the marsh, both of them understanding in different languages that Ryan's betrayal had delivered them, not to emptiness, but to the edge of something already moving. By the third morning at Cedar Hook, the storm station no longer felt like an abandoned structure Cole Mercer had been given as an insult. But it did not feel like shelter yet either, because every hour the wind found another loose board to pry at. Every tide pushed brackish water higher beneath the pilings, and every repair seemed to reveal a deeper wound in the building, as if salt, neglect, and human intention had been working together for years. Cole moved through the gray light in his full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, the long-sleeved blouse and matching trousers in AOR-2 green digital woodland camouflage, darkened at the knees from wet sand. Brown combat boots, leaving careful prints across the warped floor. His right shoulder locked close under the brace, while his left hand did most of the labor. He nailed salvage shutters across the broken windows, tied the front door tighter with cord, and dragged rotten debris away from the stove, but his eyes kept returning to the marsh beyond the western side of the station, where the orange survey stake stood too bright against the dead grass, and where, more than once, a small dark shape had moved between the reeds and vanished before he could raise the binoculars. Valor noticed the shape before Cole did every time, but the 7-year-old sable German Shepherd K9 did not react to it the way he reacted to threats, because when the dog sensed danger, his body became a hard line, ears forward, lips lifting, weight gathering into the front legs. Yet whenever that small shadow crossed the marsh edge, Valor only stood still and watched with his amber eyes narrowed, tail level, nose testing the air as if sorting fear from hostility. That difference mattered to Cole. In the teams, the men who survived were the ones who learned to trust small differences before large evidence arrived, and Valor had saved lives by reading intent in scent, breath, pressure, and silence. So Cole did not chase the figure on the first day, or the second. He simply adjusted his work so that his back was never fully turned to the reeds, and he hung 2 empty food cans from fishing line near the western path, not enough to trap anyone, only enough to tell him if someone came too close while pretending not to. The old station slowly exposed its history as Cole repaired it, not through clean records or plaques, but through objects half buried in corners. A rusted flare box, stamped with a county seal, a mold-swollen logbook from the late 1980s, a cracked life ring with Cedar Hook Rescue painted in faded red, and beneath a collapsed shelf, a child's blue plastic hair clip that looked strangely recent compared to everything else. Cole held the clip for a moment, rain tapping through the patched roof above him, then placed it on the table near the photograph of his parents. He did not like unexplained small things. Large threats announced themselves with machinery, contracts, men in clean boots, and signatures, but small things told the truth about who had passed through a place when no one was supposed to be there. Valor sniffed the hair clip once, gave a soft huff, and turned toward the marsh again, where the reeds were moving against the wind. That afternoon, while Cole was on the roof, tying a sheet of corrugated tin over the worst gap, Valor suddenly left the porch without a bark and moved west at a fast, silent trot, not bolting in alarm, not wandering in curiosity, but following something with absolute decision. Cole cursed under his breath, climbed down too quickly for his shoulder, and followed with a flashlight, field knife, and the shotgun slung low against his left side. The path into the marsh was less a path than a memory pressed into wet grass, winding between black pools and raised hummocks where salt cedar roots gripped the mud. The air smelled of brine, decaying reeds, and diesel faint enough to seem imaginary until the wind shifted. Valor stayed ahead but never disappeared, his sable body sliding through the grass like a shadow with discipline, and after 10 minutes, he stopped near the base of an old signal tower that had once carried weather equipment, its metal legs rusted red, its ladder broken, and its lower platform half hidden by a lean-to of driftwood and torn tarp. The boy beneath that tarp held a small knife in both hands, and even before Cole saw his face, he recognized the posture, because cornered people all made themselves smaller in the same way, shoulders tight, chin down, eyes measuring distance to every exit. Noah Briggs was 15, though hunger and bad sleep made him look younger from far away and older up close. A thin white boy with sandy brown hair hanging in damp curls over his forehead, gray eyes too alert for a child, a split lower lip healing badly, and an oversized army green coat with one sleeve torn near the cuff. His jeans were wet at the knees, his boots were wrapped with silver duct tape where the soles had come loose, and there was a faded bruise along his jaw that he tried to hide by turning his face toward the marsh. He had the sharp, defensive anger of someone who had learned that asking adults for help could make things worse. And when Cole lowered the shotgun without setting it down, Noah tightened his grip on the knife and said, "You work for them?" Cole stayed 6 feet back and let the rain and wind fill the space between them. Because pushing frightened kids was no different from pushing frightened dogs. It only proved their fear right. "No," he said, keeping his voice low. "I live at the station now." Noah laughed once without humor, the sound too dry for his age. Nobody lives there, unless somebody wants them gone. Valor solved what words could not. The German Shepherd walked past Cole, slow enough not to startle the boy, lowered himself into the mud beside the opening, and rested his chin on his paws. Noah stared at the dog, at the scarred muzzle, the bent ear, the calm weight of him, and something in his face changed from resistance into exhaustion. "What's his name?" he asked. "Valor," Cole said. Noah swallowed. "Military dog?" Cole nodded. "Used to be." The boy looked at Valor longer than he looked at Cole, then lowered the knife just enough to prove he wanted to believe something and hated himself for it. Noah did not tell the story in order, because people who had been carrying fear too long rarely did. It came out in fragments while Cole stood under the broken tower, and Valor remained between them like a quiet agreement. Noah's stepfather worked private security for Atlantic Shoreline Group, a broad, hard-drinking man with shaved hair and a habit of using silence before violence, the kind of man who acted polite in public and cruel in rooms without witnesses. Noah had overheard him talking with company men near the old levee road south of Cedar Hook, men who used words like managed breach, emergency redevelopment, storm loss acquisition, and county relief reimbursement, as if destruction could be turned into paperwork before the first wave hit. According to Noah, they planned to weaken a section of the old storm barrier near the poorer end of the island, where bait shacks, trailer homes, and small family houses sat low enough that one bad surge could ruin everything. If water came through during a storm, the land would be called unlivable. The owners would be pressured to sell, and Atlantic Shoreline Group could move in with resort plans they had already drawn. The proof was inside an old phone wrapped in 2 plastic bags and hidden beneath a loose board in the lean-to. Noah pulled it out with shaking fingers but did not hand it over, only showed Cole the cracked screen long enough for him to see video thumbnails, a voice memo file, and a blurry frame of men standing near orange survey stakes at dusk. "I'm not taking it to the sheriff," Noah said, his jaw hardening before Cole could ask. "They know people. Your brother knows people. Ryan Mercer was there." Cole felt the name move through him like cold water under a door, but his face did not change. "You saw Ryan?" Noah nodded once, twice. "He wears nice jackets and talks like he's doing everybody a favor. That was Ryan, clean boots on rotten ground." Cole looked toward the marsh, toward the stakes, toward the storm station Ryan had handed him, and understood that the betrayal was not only personal anymore. Valor rose then and stepped to Noah, pressing his head lightly against the boy's knee. Noah tried to stay hard for 1 second, then broke silently, tears dropping into the mud while he kept one hand buried in the dog's fur, as if kindness hurt more than fear. Near sunset, the second vehicle Cole had seen since arriving at Cedar Hook came crawling along the sand road, with hazard lights blinking through the mist, and when it stopped near the station, the woman who stepped out moved like someone used to bad weather, bad roads, and people who lied because they thought uniforms made them official. Grace Holloway was 36, tall and lean with strong shoulders, copper-brown hair tied in a low knot beneath a dark Coast rescue cap, and a narrow face made sharper by sun, salt, and years of squinting into rain from rescue boats. She had calm brown eyes that missed very little, a small scar across one eyebrow from a boating accident that had killed her older brother when she was 19, and a controlled, practical manner that made nervous people feel safer while making dishonest people careful. She wore a Navy rescue jacket over waterproof pants and carried a clipboard sealed inside a plastic case. but her right hand stayed near the radio on her belt as she studied Cole's repaired shutters, the hanging can alarms, the tire tracks, and the dog at his side. "Cole Mercer?" she called. "Grace Holloway, local coastal rescue. I came to see whether you were trespassing, hiding, or being used as a distraction." Cole almost respected the directness enough to answer immediately, but Valor answered first in his own way, walking down the porch steps, crossing the wet sand, and sitting beside Grace's boots without so much as a warning rumble. Cole stared because Valor tolerated people when ordered, ignored most strangers when bored, and judged everyone else with quiet suspicion. Yet now, he sat beside this woman as if the decision had already been made. Grace looked down at the dog, held one gloved hand still for him to smell, and when Valor leaned into the contact once, her expression softened in a way that revealed grief under the competence. "Well," she said quietly, scratching behind his scarred ear, "that is either a good sign or a very expensive character test." Cole lowered his guard half an inch, which for him was almost an introduction. Grace told him she had been tracking blocked evacuation routes, altered storm maps, and trucks moving after midnight near the old Levee Road, and that the county files were beginning to look cleaner than the ground itself. She had come to warn him, but also to learn whether he was part of the activity around Cedar Hook. Cole did not give her Noah's name, not yet, because trust could arrive quickly through a dog and still need time through a man. But he told her enough about the fuel cans, the survey stakes, the carved initials, and the footprints to change the way she looked toward the marsh. Grace listened without interrupting, the wind pulling loose strands of hair across her cheek, and when he finished, she opened her weather case and showed him the latest advisory. A tropical system offshore had strengthened faster than expected, still far enough out to be called uncertain by people who preferred calm words, but close enough that the projected cone bent toward the Outer Banks like a finger. "If it turns north tonight," Grace said, keeping her voice steady, "we have days, not a week." Cole looked past her toward the orange stakes glowing faintly in the marsh dusk, toward the low land beyond them where families still thought the barrier would hold, and he understood with the cold clarity of a man recognizing a battlefield before the first shot, that if Atlantic Shoreline Group had truly weakened the storm wall, then one hard tide and one dirty decision could drown half the town. Before the radio admitted what the ocean had already decided, Valor knew, and in the long gray morning at Cedar Hook, while the storm station shivered on its old pilings, and the marsh grass flattened under a wind that no longer came steady from the east but curled strangely from the southeast, the 7-year-old sable German Shepherd K9 moved from window to window with the focused unease of a sentry hearing movement beyond the wire. Cole Mercer watched him from beside the potbelly stove, wearing his full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, the long-sleeved blouse, and matching trousers in AOR, 2 green digital woodland camouflage, damp at the cuffs from marsh water, brown combat boots planted on the uneven floor, his right shoulder braced tightly beneath his jacket, his face drawn pale from 2 nights of broken sleep and pain he refused to name. Valor did not whine, did not pace uselessly, did not look to Cole for comfort. He lifted his black nose to the broken window seams, drew in the air in short, hard pulls, then turned his amber eyes toward the ocean again, ears high, body rigid, and Cole felt the old cold logic settle into him, because he had seen that posture before attacks, before ambushes, before the world changed faster than a radio report could warn anyone. By noon, the official Weather Channel finally caught up, spitting static through the battery radio Grace Holloway had left behind, the announcer's calm voice flattened by interference as the tropical system offshore strengthened and bent toward the Outer Banks sooner than expected. Cole listened once, then stopped listening because the words were already behind the evidence. The tide was wrong. The birds were gone. The reeds were lying down as if pressed by an invisible hand. Far beyond the marsh, the orange survey stakes still marked the forbidden line toward the old storm barrier, and somewhere out there, Noah Briggs was hiding with a broken phone full of proof, too afraid to come inside, too smart to trust the wrong door. Cole left a wrapped protein bar, a canteen, and a dry poncho beneath the old signal tower, without calling the boy's name, then returned to the station and began turning a punishment into a position, the way he had been trained to do when retreat was not available, and people might walk toward him without knowing they were already in danger. The work had a rhythm, and the rhythm kept fear outside the chest where it belonged. Cole climbed the observation tower with a lantern tied to his belt and mounted it high beneath the cracked platform rail, fixing a sheet of polished scrap metal behind it so the light would throw farther through rain. He found the rusted generator box beneath the rear stairs, cleaned salt from the contacts, stripped wire from an old lamp, and coaxed one coughing burst of power from the machine before it died again, enough to tell him the thing was not dead, only stubborn. He strung empty cans along fishing line around the western path, tied red cloth markers from the station to the raised ground behind the dunes, stacked rain barrels beneath the roof drip, gathered blankets from a sealed emergency chest, gone half-rotten with mold, sorted a handful of bandages, flares, rope, and expired water purification tablets onto the table, and with each small practical motion the place changed slightly, not into safety, not yet, but into something that could answer back when the storm came to take it. Grace returned in the late afternoon, her coastal rescue truck crawling through blowing sand with its headlights on, and when she stepped down into the wind, she looked less like an official visitor than a woman arriving at a scene she had already feared in her bones. Grace Holloway, 36, tall, lean, copper-brown hair, tied back under a navy cap, face sharpened by sun, salt, and old grief from the boating accident that had taken her brother years earlier, carried 2 plastic bins of medical supplies and a coil of marine rope against her hip. But she stopped before the porch because what she saw was not a damaged veteran hiding in a broken station. She saw route markers, signal light, water catchment, perimeter alarms, blankets staged near the stove, and Cole, moving through it all with the calm, cold efficiency of a man setting conditions before impact. "You are not just protecting yourself," she said, raising her voice over the wind. Cole tightened a knot without looking at her. Storm does not care who owns the building. Grace watched Valor test the air again, saw the dog's fur lift along his spine, and her expression changed from suspicion to recognition. "You are building a refuge," she said. Cole did not answer, which was answer enough. The first wall of rain struck near dusk, hard and sudden, turning the world outside the station into gray motion, and for the next hour, there was only wind, water, and the deepening roar of surf beyond the dunes. Grace worked beside Cole without asking permission, taping plastic over the worst gaps, checking the medical kit, moving the driest blankets away from the leaking wall, and the two of them spoke only in short necessary phrases, because anything else would have been wasted breath. Then, Valor froze. At the door. He did not look at the ocean this time. He looked down the flooded access road where the sand track curved through a low wash near the marsh, and before Cole could hear anything beyond the storm, the dog barked once, sharp and commanding, then launched off the porch into the rain. Cole grabbed the rope and followed, Grace behind him with a flashlight cutting through the water like a blade, and only after they reached the bend did the overturned pickup appear below them, half on its side in a ditch filling with brown stormwater. The driver was a young mother named Hannah Price, 28, small-framed and dark-haired, a local diner waitress, with tired green eyes and the tough, polite kindness of someone who had learned to smile through double shifts and unpaid bills, now trapped against the steering wheel with blood mixing into rainwater along her temple. In the back seat, her daughter Emily, 6 years old, thin and pale with a pink raincoat twisted around one arm, was pinned by a collapsed child seat and crying so hard the sound came in broken pieces under the thunder. Cole tied the rope around his waist and handed the other end to Grace, then moved into the ditch without hesitation, water slamming against his thighs, shoulder flaring as he braced one boot against the truck frame and forced the rear door wider inch by inch. Valor plunged in beside him, teeth closing on the loose strap near Emily's seat, pulling backward with controlled force, while Cole reached through broken glass and spoke low through the storm, telling the child to look at him, only at him, because panic was a flood too, and it could drown a person before the water did. Getting Emily free tore fire through Cole's shoulder so violently that black dots moved across his vision, but he kept his voice steady while Grace hauled the girl up the bank and wrapped her in a blanket from the rescue truck. Hannah was harder. The steering column had folded across her legs. The cab tilted deeper as runoff pushed against the undercarriage, and for one terrible second, Cole felt the truck shift beneath his hands, the way armored doors used to shift before collapsing under blast pressure. The memory came hot and bright: dust, rotor wash, A handler screaming for a K9 that did not answer. Blood on tan fur. No room on the evacuation bird. Not enough hands to save everything. Valor barked beside him, not outside the memory, but through it. And Cole came back to North Carolina Rain, with the dog's shoulder pressed against his knee. He wedged the pry bar under the column. Grace pulled on the rope. And when the metal finally gave, Hannah slid free with a cry that vanished into the wind. They had almost reached the raised road when the storm threw the piece of wood. It came from the direction of the broken barrier fencing. A long, waterlogged plank, lifted and hurled sideways by a gust that sounded like a freight train crossing the marsh. And Cole saw it too late to do anything but turn his body between it and the child in Grace's arms. Valor saw it too, and the German Shepherd lunged across the gap with the same impossible loyalty that had carried him through smoke, gunfire, and rooms full of men who wanted his handler dead. The plank struck Valor's front leg and shoulder with a heavy, sickening crack, knocking him sideways into the flooded grass. The dog made one small sound, not a howl, not even a real cry, just a sharp, broken breath that cut through Cole more cleanly than shrapnel. For the first time that night, Cole's control nearly failed. His hand shook as he dropped beside Valor, rain washing over the dog's sable fur, and the old memory of the K9 he had not saved came roaring back so hard he could barely see the present. Valor tried to stand before Cole could lift him. His front leg buckled, his shoulder trembled, and pain pulled his lips tight, but he forced himself upright anyway, then pushed his head against Cole's chest, as if the wounded dog were the one giving orders. Grace had Hannah and Emily moving toward the station, both alive, both coughing, both wrapped in wet blankets, and somewhere beyond them, the lantern on the tower burned through the rain with a weak yellow glow. Cole understood then, not as an idea, but as something heavy and final beneath his ribs, that Valor had never been guarding only him. The dog had been reading the wind, the road, the fear, the people who had not arrived yet, and the broken station itself, as if loyalty could expand when the world demanded it. Cole hooked one arm beneath Valor's harness, ignoring the white-hot pain in his own shoulder, and together they limped through the storm toward the porch, one injured man, one injured K9, and two rescued civilians behind them, all following the light. Night settled hard, and the first headlights appeared less than an hour later, faint at first through rain and blowing sand, then brighter as vehicles crawled along the flooded road toward Cedar Hook. A battered minivan came first, then an old fisherman's truck, then another pair of lights swinging uncertainly between the red cloth markers Cole had tied before the worst of the weather arrived. The people who climbed out looked stunned by wind and fear, their jackets soaked, their faces pale in the lantern glow, and each one stared at the storm station, as if a rotten building on crooked pilings had somehow become the only solid thing left on the island. Cole stood in the doorway with rain running from his camouflage sleeves, Grace behind him guiding Hannah and Emily toward the stove, and Valor lying just inside the threshold with his injured leg stretched awkwardly but his eyes still fixed on the dark road. The first man to reach the porch was gray-bearded, coughing, clutching a little boy against his chest, and when Cole opened the door wider, the man said the words that would return again and again through the storm, from every frightened face that followed the tower lantern out of the dark. We saw the light. By midnight, Cedar Hook Storm Station had stopped being Cole Mercer's punishment and had become the only breathing shelter at the far end of the island, its patched walls shaking under rain, its old floorboards crowded with wet boots, sleeping children, coughing strangers, and frightened people who had arrived through the dark because the lantern on the observation tower had given them something to follow when every road sign disappeared behind sheets of water. Cole moved among them in his full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, the long-sleeved blouse and matching trousers in AOR 2 green digital woodland camouflage, soaked through at the shoulders, brown combat boots tracking mud across the warped floor, his right shoulder burning beneath the brace, and his face carrying that cold, controlled stillness. People mistake for courage until they see what it costs. Valor lay near the doorway with his injured front leg stretched stiffly before him. The 7-year-old sable German Shepherd, K9, breathing through pain without complaint, one amber eye half open toward the road, still guarding, still listening, as if the storm had not earned the right to enter without passing through him first. The station filled with pieces of the island. There was Virgil Tate, a 70-year-old fisherman with a bent back, a white beard yellowed at the edges from years of pipe smoke, and hands so thick with scars that rope burns looked like old handwriting across his knuckles. He had spent his life acting rough with men and gentle with children, and now he stood near the stove, wringing water from his cap, while pretending he was not afraid. There was Linda Carver, a retired school nurse in her late 60s, short, broad-hipped, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could silence panic with one look because she had once run a classroom full of bleeding knees and broken homes, and Cole put her in charge of checking smoke inhalation, shock, and minor cuts. There were two stranded tourists from Ohio, Mark and Jenna Lowell, young, pale, and stunned by how quickly vacation had turned into survival. And there were local families who had left with nothing but medicine bags, phone chargers, pets, and children wrapped in beach towels. Nobody called Cole leader, but every frightened face turned toward him when the wind hit the walls hard enough to make the whole structure lean. Cole organized them the way his body remembered organizing men under fire, not with speeches, not with softness, but with clear tasks given before fear could grow teeth. Strong backs carried sandbags from the porch to the weak western wall. Teenagers filled buckets with rainwater and passed them hand to hand. Anyone with a working phone checked for signal near the southern window. Linda Carver took Hannah Price and little Emily into the warmest corner to check bruises and breathing, and Grace Holloway crouched beside the radio table with her copper-brown hair plastered damp against her face, her rescue jacket open at the throat, her calm voice cutting through static as she tried to reach county dispatch. Noah Briggs stood near the map spread across the table, still too thin inside his torn coat, gray eyes darting from the door to the windows. But when Cole asked him which marsh paths stayed above water longest, the boy leaned in and pointed with shaking fingers to trails even locals had forgotten, naming old duck blinds, raised oyster mounds, and a narrow service ridge behind the levee road that might still hold if the surge did not cut it first. The radio broke through shortly after 1 a.m, with a burst of voices that did not come from dispatch, only from someone's open channel near the storm barrier. And at first the words were lost beneath wind and interference, until Noah went white. He grabbed the edge of the table so hard his knuckles blanched, staring at the radio as if a ghost had stepped out of it. Cole saw the change before the boy spoke. "That's Darren," Noah whispered. Darren Briggs was Noah's stepfather, a 42-year-old private security contractor for Atlantic Shoreline Group, heavy through the chest, shaved-headed, red-faced, and mean in the quiet way that never wasted anger in public because it preferred locked doors. Noah had lived under that silence long enough to recognize the shape of danger through static. Then another voice came through, talking about clearing equipment, access lights, and the south barrier cut, and Noah began backing away from the table. "They're there," he said, voice cracking. "They're at the old wall. If they find my phone cache or wipe the site, it's gone. Everything's gone." Grace looked at Cole, and the decision formed between them without being spoken, because the storm was at its strongest. The station was full, Valor was hurt, and the evidence Noah carried might be the only thing that proved the flood about to hit the poorer end of the island had not been an act of God alone. Cole gave Virgil control of the sandbag line, told Linda to keep everyone away from the windows, ordered the tourists to hold flashlights at the marked path if anyone else arrived, then looked down at Valor and said, "Stay." The dog lifted his head, ears forward, and the look he gave Cole was pure refusal. Grace tightened the straps on her waterproof pack. Noah shoved the wrapped phone into his coat, then hesitated, terrified, and determined in the same breath. Cole should have left the dog behind, should have protected the shelter with him, but Valor struggled upright on 3 good legs and limped to the door with the same stubborn duty that had carried him through smoke and war. Cole exhaled once, low and angry. Fine, close. Outside. The storm had turned the world into water and noise. The red cloth markers snapped violently from the branches as Cole, Grace, Noah, and Valor moved through the marsh path toward the old barrier. Flashlights low, bodies bent into the wind, boots sinking into mud that tried to hold them with every step. Noah led them along a raised ridge of oyster shell and packed sand, his thin frame almost disappearing inside the rain, while Grace followed close enough to grab his coat if the wind took him, and Cole moved last with Valor beside his knee, watching the black spaces between reeds where men could hide and where floodwater could open without warning. Twice the storm shoved Cole sideways hard enough to send pain flashing through his braced shoulder. Twice, Valor pressed against him, Not steady himself, but steady Cole. Then through the rain came the growl of engines, work lights glowing yellow near the barrier road, and the ugly metallic bite of machinery, working where no machinery should have been working, in the middle of a hurricane. The broken section of the storm barrier appeared beyond a line of leaning pines, and for a moment even Cole stopped moving. A long cut had been carved into the old concrete and packed earth wall, not the random collapse of age or tide, but a deliberate wound made by equipment, clean enough at the edges to show blade marks beneath the pouring water. Atlantic surf, swollen by wind and tide, hammered through the gap and rushed inland across the lower road toward the neighborhoods beyond, carrying mud, branches, and broken fencing into the dark. Near the work lights stood two white utility trucks marked with Atlantic Shoreline Group, their logos smeared by rain, and beside one of them, Ryan Mercer held a flashlight under his expensive hooded jacket, face pale but still trying to arrange itself into authority. Darren Briggs stood near him in a black raincoat, wide, hard, and watchful, with two other security men loading gear into the truck bed. Ryan saw Cole and froze, as if the storm itself had brought judgment wearing camouflage. Cole crossed the flooded gravel without raising his voice, which made the moment worse. Grace angled her body toward the trucks, already recording on her phone inside a waterproof sleeve, while Noah hid half behind a leaning post, shaking so hard Valor moved in front of him despite the injured leg. Ryan lifted both hands, not surrendering, only negotiating. "Cole, listen," he shouted, over the wind. "You do not understand what this is. The company had emergency survey permission. I signed access paperwork. That is all. The barrier was failing anyway, and the money was going to save what was left of the family property." Cole looked past him at the water, pouring through the cut, then at the low lights of the town beyond the marsh, where families were still running from homes that had trusted the wall. "You did not sell land," Cole said, his voice low enough that Ryan had to lean forward to hear it. "You sold people." For 1 second, Ryan had no answer. Then Darren moved, not toward Cole, but toward Noah, because men like Darren always recognize the smallest target first. Noah panicked and ran toward the side path where he had hidden a second copy of the video file beneath a broken marker post, and Grace shouted his name as the saturated ground under the road edge gave way. The boy dropped from sight into a washout channel, the floodwater catching him at the waist and spinning him against a sunken fence rail. His wrapped phone flew from his coat and landed near the broken marker, half in mud, half under pouring runoff. Valor moved before Cole did, lunging into the water on his bad leg, yelping once when the current struck his injured shoulder, but still driving forward, ears flat, teeth bared against pain and storm, forcing himself toward the sound of Noah's choking cry. Cole followed with rope around his wrist, Grace anchoring the line behind him with both boots dug into the mud, and together they hauled Noah free, while Valor pinned the boy's coat against the fence long enough for Cole to reach him. Grace recovered the phone before the water took it, crawling through mud to grab the plastic-wrapped bundle, while her own recording kept running, catching the cut barrier, the company trucks, Darren Briggs, Ryan Mercer, and the flood rushing through the man-made breach behind them. Darren shouted something lost to the wind, but Virgil's old flare from Cole's pack hissed red into the storm when Cole struck it, painting every guilty face in emergency light. Ryan stared at his brother, soaked, cornered, and finally smaller than the lie he had built. Cole did not hit him. There was no time for that. The water was climbing too fast, and every second the broken barrier fed more of the Atlantic into the lower road. He grabbed Noah by the back of the coat, nodded once to Grace, and turned toward the station with Valor limping beside him. The dog's injured leg trembling now, but his eyes still fixed on the path home. By the time they reached Cedar Hook Storm Station again, the shelter had changed shape under the storm. Water pooled beneath the pilings and slapped against the lower steps. Sandbags had shifted, and the western wall groaned each time the surge rolled under the floor. Inside, frightened people looked up as Cole, Grace, Noah, and Valor entered soaked, muddy, and carrying proof that the disaster outside was not only weather. Grace set the phone and her recording on the table beside the radio. Noah collapsed near the stove, and Valor sank to the floor, but kept his head lifted toward the door. Cole stood in the center of the crowded room, feeling the building move under his boots, watching water rise through the gaps between warped boards, counting children, elders, injured, exits, height, wind, time, and the old observation tower behind the station. Keeping them inside meant warmth and walls. Moving them upward meant exposure and risk. The station shuddered again, harder this time, and Cole looked toward the tower through the rain-streaked window, knowing the next order would decide whether Cedar Hook became a refuge or a grave. The storm station shuddered beneath Cole Mercer's boots, as if the ocean had finally reached up and wrapped both hands around the old pilings. And in that long black hour before dawn, with water pushing through gaps in the floorboards and wind hammering the patched walls hard enough to make children cry into their mothers' coats, Cole understood that staying inside had become another kind of surrender. He stood in the middle of the crowded room wearing his full U.S. Navy working uniform Type 3, the long-sleeved blouse and matching trousers, in AOR, 2 green digital woodland camouflage, soaked dark from rain and marsh water, brown combat boots planted wide against the tilting floor, his right shoulder screaming beneath the brace, while Valor, the 7-year-old sable German Shepherd K9, with the bent ear, scarred muzzle, and injured front leg trembling under his weight, pushed himself upright near the doorway, as if he already knew the next order would require him to move. Grace Holloway looked at Cole from the radio table, her copper-brown hair plastered to her cheeks, her calm rescue worker face finally showing the strain beneath it, and Noah Briggs stood beside the map with mud on his torn coat, gray eyes wide but no longer running from the room, because fear had not left the boy. It had simply found something more important to stand beside. Cole gave the order without raising his voice, and because the people inside had already learned that his calm meant movement, not comfort, the station changed from panic into motion. Everyone up the rear ridge, then tower platform, strongest adults on the outside, children in the middle, blankets over heads. No one stops unless I tell you, he said, and Virgil Tate, the old fisherman with the white beard and rope-scarred hands, began moving people toward the back door before anyone could argue, while Linda Carver, the retired school nurse with gray hair pinned under a wet scarf and a voice sharp enough to cut through fear, wrapped Emily Price in a blanket and handed Hannah a flashlight. Grace took the flare bag and climbed first toward the observation tower, leaning into the wind with the steady determination of someone who had spent half her life rescuing people from water that did not care about names, while Noah carried the wrapped phone and Grace's recording inside his coat, as if the proof itself were a living thing. Valor, despite the limp that nearly folded his front leg beneath him, moved to the rear of the line and kept turning his head from the marsh to the people, counting them in the only language he knew. Outside, the world had become a moving wall of rain, salt, and flying sand, and the climb to the higher ground behind Cedar Hook felt longer than any distance marked on a map, because every step had to be fought from the storm. Adults slipped, children screamed. One tourist fell to his knees and was hauled up by Virgil before the water could catch his legs, and all the while, the old station groaned behind them, its lantern still burning above the porch like a stubborn pulse. Cole moved along the line, one hand on shoulders, coats, elbows, whatever he could grab, pushing people upward while his own injured shoulder flashed white each time the wind threw him sideways. Valor stayed last until the final child cleared the low ground, then limped after them with his head low, ears flattened, and eyes still fixed toward the flooded road. When the first red flare burst from the tower above, fired by Grace into the screaming sky, the light spread through rain and darkness like blood across black glass, and for one brief second, every terrified face on the ridge turned upward, because the island finally had something visible to answer the storm. At the tower platform, Grace fired a second flare and clipped the emergency beacon to the rail, while Cole dropped beside the old generator box and forced the repaired radio into life with wire stripped from the station lamp, one hand shaking from cold and pain, the other steady enough to find the frequency. Static fought him, then broke apart. Cedar Hook Refuge, emergency shelter, multiple civilians, floodwater rising, coordinates transmitting, he repeated until his voice went rough, and Noah stood beside him holding the antenna cable high with both hands, trembling so hard the wire rattled against the rail, but refusing to let go. Below them, headlights appeared and vanished through sheets of rain, one vehicle sliding off the lower road before stopping at a broken angle near the marsh, and when people shouted that someone was inside, Cole already knew before he saw the expensive jacket in the flashlight beam. Ryan Mercer had returned to the place he had meant to bury his brother, injured, soaked, one side of his face cut by glass, And for a moment, the crowd's fear turned into something hotter as they recognized him from Grace's recording and Noah's trembling accusation. Virgil stepped toward Ryan first, his old hands closing into fists, and another man muttered that they should leave him to the water. But Cole moved between them, with Valor at his side, the wounded dog's low growl cutting through the rain before the anger could become violence. Ryan looked smaller than he ever had, his sandy blonde hair plastered to his forehead, pale green eyes stripped of the practiced confidence he used to wear like a clean coat, and when he saw Cole standing there in storm water, bruised, exhausted, still giving orders, while the town he had endangered gathered behind him, shame crossed his face so quickly, it almost looked like fear. Cole grabbed him by the collar and pulled him toward the higher ground, not gently, not brotherly, but alive. "Today we save people first," Cole said, turning his eyes on the crowd so no one could mistake the line he was drawing. "Justice comes after." No one cheered. No one forgave. But they moved, and Ryan was dragged beneath the tower with the rest of them. Near dawn, the storm began to loosen its grip by degrees, not ending, not kindly, but losing enough strength for engines to reach them. The first sound came from above, a Coast Guard helicopter thudding through low clouds, its searchlight cutting across the flooded marsh, and Cole's whole body locked the instant the rotor wash hit the platform. Afghanistan flashed behind his eyes with cruel speed, dust instead of rain, hot metal instead of salt air, men shouting over radio static, a K9 left behind in smoke because the world had run out of room. Valor felt it before anyone else did. The dog pushed against Cole's leg, injured shoulder trembling, scarred head pressing hard into his hand, and Cole came back one breath at a time to North Carolina, to the tower, to the people alive around him. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale, the Coast Guard rescue lead who descended with the first team, was a broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, with a shaved head, calm eyes, and the clipped authority of someone who had carried too many people out of flooded places to waste words. He took in the tower, the civilians, the flares, the wounded dog, and Cole's uniform in one sweeping look, then nodded once. "We've got you." By sunrise, high-water trucks and rescue boats had reached the ridge from the inland side, and every person who had followed Cole's light through the storm was accounted for. Hannah and Emily were evacuated for treatment. Linda rode with the children. Virgil refused medical attention, until Grace threatened to tie him to a stretcher herself, and Noah handed the wrapped phone to Special Agent Rebecca Sloan, a federal investigator in her early 40s with dark skin, close-cropped hair, wireframe glasses, and the patient, unsmiling focus of a woman who trusted evidence more than speeches. Grace added her own recording, showing the cut barrier, the company trucks, Darren Briggs, and Ryan, standing in the floodlit rain near the breach, and by mid-morning the first arrests had begun at the lower road, while Atlantic Shoreline Group's emergency access permits were seized. Darren Briggs was taken in mud-covered and furious. Several company supervisors were pulled from a convoy before they could leave the island, and Ryan Mercer sat on the bumper of a rescue truck, with a blanket around his shoulders, while federal agents read him his rights for fraud, conspiracy, and concealing a hazard that could have killed half the low road. Before they took him away, Ryan asked for 1 minute, and Cole gave it because the storm was over, enough for mercy to have shape again, though not soft enough to become weakness. Ryan stood in front of him with shaking hands and a face emptied of every excuse he had used to survive himself. And when he said, "I'm sorry, Cole," it sounded less like a defense than the first honest thing he had managed in years. Cole did not hug him. He did not tell him they were fine. He did not pretend blood-erased consequence. Valor stood beside Cole with his injured leg lifted slightly off the ground, watching Ryan with quiet, unblinking judgment, and Cole rested one hand on the dog's head as he answered, "I'm alive." "They're alive. That's what matters now." Ryan nodded once, smaller than Cole had ever seen him, then turned toward the agents. Forgiveness, Cole understood, did not always open a door. Sometimes it only kept hate from owning the house. Months later, Cedar Hook looked different, without losing its scars. The old storm station had been rebuilt by donations, volunteer hands, salvaged lumber, county emergency funds, and stubborn locals who arrived on weekends, pretending they had only come to drop off supplies, and a hand-painted sign now stood beside the raised road. Cedar Hook Refuge Station. Cole became its volunteer keeper, though he never liked the title, and he still wore his NWU Type 3, when working the outer trails because some uniforms remained useful long after wars ended. Grace continued with coastal rescue and came often with updated maps, medical bins, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead, while Noah entered a youth protection program, went back to school, and spent afternoons repairing radios in the corner of the station with the guarded pride of a boy slowly learning that safety could be repeated. Valor recovered, though the limp stayed, and every night Cole placed a padded bed beside the stove for him, and every night the old K9 used it once before returning to the doorway, because old soldiers kept old posts. The next winter storm brought rain instead of fear. A lost family followed the tower light up the road just after dark, their truck crawling through mist and standing water, until it stopped before the rebuilt porch, and the father who stepped out was young, exhausted, holding a sleeping child against his chest while his wife clutched a soaked map in both hands. Inside, Grace reached for blankets without needing to be asked. Noah turned up the radio and checked the weather band, and Valor rose stiffly beside Cole. Amber eyes brightened the doorway, sable fur marked by old scars and new purpose. Cole opened the door wider, warm stove light spilling across his shoulders and into the rain. And for a moment, the ranch he had lost, the money signed away, the brother who betrayed him, and the rotten station meant to finish him all stood behind him like things that had tried and failed to decide his ending. "Come on in," he said to the family, his voice low and steady. Wind gets worse after dark. Above them, the tower beacon burned through the storm, and this time, the light did not go out. God does not always send miracles in a loud way. Sometimes he sends a light in the storm, a loyal dog, or a broken man who still chooses to save others. Cole lost almost everything, but God turned his pain into purpose and made a forgotten place become a shelter for many lives. If you are facing your own storm, remember that God can still use what is left and turn your scars into strength. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Comment, "Amen," if you believe God can turn pain into purpose. And subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, healing, and redemption. May God bless you and your family, protect you through every storm, and keep his light shining in your life.